Hi, thank you for being here. My name is Douglas Brandel. I'm an MES Solutions Engineer with Sepasoft. Quick introduction to Sepasoft. We are the premier technology provider for the Ignition platform. We provide MES solutions, MES modules on the platform, solving we have a batch procedure module, workflow engine, we have OEE, track and trace. We try to cover the gamut of all of the MES activities inside that platform. However, today what I'm going to be showing is our SepaIQ platform. SepaIQ is a data informatics, think of it as like a contextualized, managed data pipeline. It's perfect for this space, it's perfect for ProveIt. So yeah, let's go ahead and get into it. Right. So one of the things that we have to do is we have to identify the problem. And it's a really common problem right now. Everybody's interested in it, especially over the past 2 years. And it's about being able to effectively leverage AI in manufacturing. And the problem really isn't the models and the maturity of the models, it's about the data. The data is raw, it's noisy, and it's all production data. It's real world, it's sensors that jitter. And a lot of the time, that data doesn't come with context. You can't just plug an LLM on top of your raw data because it's not reliable. And sometimes, in order to do that, you have to build out that appropriate context in order to get appropriate responses from your language model. So what I'm going to show today is effectively, this is a quick, basic drawing of what I'm showing. We have the plant 4 layer on the left, which is the virtual factory. What we're doing is we're leveraging the Enterprise C virtual factory. It's and I'm specifically looking at their bioreactor. A bioreactor, if you're not familiar with it, you can think of it as like brewing beer. Now, when you're brewing beer, typically you want to keep the liquids and throw away the solids. In the case of bioreactors, you keep the solids and throw away the liquids. So they're exposing the data over MQTT. They have a couple of historians, OPC, and we're going to consume that data, push it into our analytics engine of SepaIQ, and we're going to push that back up into some enterprise analytics, into a separate enterprise data lake, where we're going to do some reporting. We're going to leverage some language models to do natural language processing, leverage their real power of a language model, which is to understand language and have it interrogate our production layer. So let's go ahead and get into it. One of the things that people typically do here is they kind of start in the middle. They assume that data already has meaning. And there's a lot of vendors here, I'm not knocking on anybody, but there's a lot of vendors here who are concerned about how do I get data from A to B? How can I leverage this data on the enterprise? That is important, but the most important thing is to give that data meaning and context. And that's hard work, and that hard work is what we do. So let's go ahead and back out of this screen, and I want to show you the noise. So if we log into the MQTT Explorer, I want to show you what we're seeing here. This sub is the bioreactor on Enterprise C, and what you're seeing is all sorts of data updating periodically, some data points once a second. Now this ends up being a bit of a problem, because if you were to just take this data, historize it, what you're going to get is terabytes and terabytes of noise. You're going to get, the temperature was 29.88, the temperature was 29.89, the temperature is 29.87. That's not really insight, that's just kind of a fog. It's a noise that keeps you from seeing really what's happening on your process. So this data is transmitted over MQTT and SparkPlugB. Those are fantastic transmission protocols. That's a really important thing. I don't want to knock on MQTT and SparkPlugB. However, they were never meant to contextualize this data. They don't solve the contextualization problem. They solve the transportation of that data problem. And this is the gap that SepaIQ fills. So I'm going to back out here and show you one more complicated architecture drawing. So I want just to give you some context as to what I'm showing you, where we're at. I think this is a little easier to follow. So we have along the right side here, we have our plant floor, our physical layer, our control PLC. This is what was recorded into the virtual factory. It's being exposed over the MQTT broker, which is what we just saw, is all that noisy data. Now what I'm going to do is I'm pulling that data into Ignition, into the Ignition tag provider, and I'm going to condition all of that data. So here, if I go into Ignition, this is the Ignition Designer. Right here is our tag browser. So what I've done is I've taken all of that raw noise, and this is an exercise that everybody has to do in the real world. If you're integrating any software, is you have to kind of filter out that data. So I've taken that and I've added some dead banding. I'm calculating moving averages. I'm providing some additional context. I'm tracking excursion events, edge detection. All of these things aren't something that naturally comes off of that raw signal. Those raw signals are important to your control systems. They are not important to people. You have to put in some insight behind that. So, what I've done with all of this data is I have all of this data that's being calculated and run. It is being pushed into SepaIQ, and SepaIQ is holding all of that information, and it is performing extra calculations on it. We're calculating some various trends. We're doing we're calculating control efforts off of some of these various values, off of the things like the max RPM of your agitator. What is my O2 flow rate? What's the maximum O2 flow rate? All of these things are very important, but my SCADA layer is not sitting here performing those calculations. Well, it actually is, but I want to show how we can centralize some of this information so that we can get some consistency across our entire organization of this context that we're building. So let's go into our Ignition project. So this is just a pretty simple rudimentary graph. We've got a lot of things to show you, so I have to keep it relatively simple. What I'm seeing here is a specific batch. I've got all of the batches. I think this whole process repeated over maybe about 28 days. There's quite a bit of data here, but SepaIQ is able to pull and retrieve this information incredibly quickly. And we are displaying it as these charts. We're calculating just some high-level metadata. You've got your batch, you've got your dissolved oxygen set points, you've got your average deviation. I'm calculating excursion events for dissolved oxygen, temperature, and pH. These are very important things to people who understand the process. They understand it a little better than I do. And here what we can see is we're seeing various movement of the control effort by whichever attribute is driving it. In this case, it could be our agitator, our O2 flow, or our airflow. And this tells you effectively how hard your control system is working to maintain this bioreactor, maintain the pH inside of your bioreactor, maintain the oxygen levels inside that bioreactor. Now, what SepaIQ is doing is we've got it set so we can annotate our phases. We're capturing all of that other metadata. So in this case, I can look at when was I feeding my bioreactor with more of the material? When was I actually sourcing the media for it? When was I inoculating it, et cetera? All of this is calculated and stored within SepaIQ. And one of the nice parts about SepaIQ is we have all sorts of means to pull data into the system. It's not just an API. We are not limited just to Ignition. We have a pretty robust connector architecture. So we can consume data from an API. We can do it from Kafka. We can do it from MQTT v3 or v5. We can do Spark-Plug-B, and we can do external databases. And then we can push that data out via most of those same methods. And we can go out to Azure Event Grid, Azure IoT Hub, external databases, which is what you're going to see today for the Power BI report that I'm going to show you in a bit. So if we look at this batch, one of the things I've noticed as I go through this is, after analyzing the data, is that there's quite a bit of some things that if you're trying to analyze this data, you realize ooh, this is a bit of a problem. I have this batch that ends in, that I'm highlighting right now on my screen, and then I have a batch that was created immediately afterwards that ends in a .0. Now this is kind of some noisy data. This might be something associated with the process on the shop floor. This might be something associated with some OEM equipment that you don't necessarily have control over. And it makes it a nightmare when you're trying to do enterprise level analysis on it, because what you have to do is you have to have a data scientist in place to figure out all of these rules, all of these exceptions to what should be the case. They have to solve that. And if you have that on your enterprise layer, what about everybody else who's consuming this data? Every single person needs to account for all of these exceptions. And that is a data integrity nightmare. So your reporting layer is going to treat these as two separate batches, and that's a bit of a problem. So this is going to be our problem that we are identifying, besides that main problem that I said at the very beginning. So I think probably what we need to do is we need to figure out how to stitch this back together. So SepaIQ is it is a contextualized, managed data pipeline. And what does that mean? So we have context by our ability to associate all sorts of different data and effectively draw a picture of a process for you. Managed in that I can pass updates of my data, I can control who gets my data, I can control how I manage the updates, et cetera. So it's managed in that sense, and then data pipeline and how that data gets dispersed whenever these inserts or updates or deletes happen. So in this case, I have that one bad batch. I'm going to call it a bad batch. I don't want to delete the batch data. What I need to do is effectively merge it. So SepaIQ is also called, we say, report by exception in this field. So as data comes through, we only really record the values that change. And in this case, somebody at some point passed in a batch ID that has a .0 appended to it. So simply, all I'm going to do is I'm going to wipe out this batch ID, if I can find my keyboard, and I'm going to submit it. And what you're going to see here along the bottom right is you're going to see a propagation of that data. So I'm propagating the data back down into Ignition. So I'm going to go back to that screen in just a minute and show you, but I'm also simultaneously pushing this data up into a separate enterprise data lake. Now, for purposes of ProveIt, this is running locally on my machine, but I promise you it's a separate database. I can show that to you at the very end. So when I do this, I'm not required to run a separate ETL pipeline. I don't need to involve a DB admin. I don't need to involve a data scientist in order to manage my updates. So I have my central system here. Before we do that, let's go back in here. I have my central system here, SepaIQ. I've pushed my updates up into SepaIQ, and SepaIQ is then dispersing that data back out and back around to everybody who is listening. We follow a publish subscriber architecture, and that works fantastically for this space. You have to excuse my, my chart component. Sometimes it likes to freak out on me. If I can pick the correct chart. Which chart are we looking at here? It's temperature, dissolved oxygen. We'll look at our dissolved oxygen. So I didn't refresh this screen, I didn't do anything, but now you see if we look back at this batch list, the list of all of our batches, we no longer see that one bad record. And what I can see here, that one bad record, I had highlighted the harvest phase of this bioreactor where you're pulling the material out. Now, maybe there's not important data here for our dissolved oxygen or our temperature, but there is important data there, and it's just not stuff that I have pulled. It's very important for us to push that record back into one. So you can see here, we managed to merge that off of a simple update of the data within SepaIQ. It's been reflected back in here. All right. So next up, we have a Power BI report. So so this is showing you how the data was pushed back down, but let's go ahead and show how it was pushed up into our, and this is into our enterprise analytics system. So this is a Power BI report that I had generated for this project. I do not pretend to be a Power BI expert. I had to learn it just to do this. I'm definitely a reporting guy. I love the analysis that we can do with it. But what this is doing is this is reading data off of a completely separate database. It is completely separated out of SepaIQ besides the connector that SepaIQ uses to manage that data updates. SepaIQ will send inserts, it will send deletes, it will send updates, modifications of data to that database, but everything there is managed on that side. So here, what I can do is I have not updated the data since before we fixed it, so you will see our .0, but as I go through and I refresh from my source data lake, I can go pull up my batch. My batch record is now removed. That one bad batch, we have now merged all of that data back into a single record. So again, didn't have to write any script, didn't have to write an ETL. Yeah, it's incredibly simple, pretty straightforward. A technical person on the shop floor can go through, can make an update on that raw data, and it propagates up to your enterprise BI without any interaction. No data scientist, no analyst, and not an IT team member. And so that's what I mean when I say it's a managed data pipeline. All right, so one of the next things that you're probably going to want to see is the ability to manage calculations. So it's a nice central repository for your data. People like to throw around the word UNS. This is a great way to think about it. You can take this calculation, I can set up my rules inside of SepaIQ. I can define what does it mean for control, effort, headroom. What are these calculations? Where am I storing those definitions? SepaIQ is a fantastic place for it. So if I can go into SepaIQ, I'm going to log in here. So when you think about SepaIQ, it is more of a back-end tool. It's not much of a front-end tool. You do your display outside of SepaIQ. You do it in your Power BI, in Tableau, in SAS. You do it in Ignition. You can do it in anything else that can consume those data publishing that I had talked about earlier. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add a calculation. So we have our control effort. But let's suppose an engineer says, I'm not worried about what our control effort is. I want to know about how much room I have left. Now, this is a really easy calculation. I can take my control effort, which is a percentage, and I can say, well, let's just, 100 minus that amount. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And in order to do this, what I do, I'm going to go into my group. Think of my group as where I'm storing my data. I'm going to put a placeholder here for me to store that. I'm sorry, wrong group. Go here. So this is where I'm storing some of that data. And I'm going to create myself a new column. And I'm just going to label it control effort headroom. My data type will be a double. I'm going to save. So this is effectively my field that is going to hold my calculated values on my enterprise data lake. So you're going to see how this flows up into that separate database that we're using on Power BI. And I'm going to go ahead and manage that schema. I'm going to save my connector here. Of course, yeah, pardon me. It's called ProveIt for a reason, guys, because occasionally you have problems that occur that you don't always account for. Bear with me here. All right. So now here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to save. And what that's doing is that is effectively creating that extra column in my enterprise data lake. So if I can go in there, this is that control effort table that I was talking about. And now we see I have a brand new column added. I didn't have to. And now there's no data in there. I'll get to adding the data here in a minute. But I did not have to reach out to a DB admin. I didn't have to submit a ticket. I didn't have to have a SQL expert go through and modify and manage this. All I had to do was click a couple of buttons. And of course, in the ProveIt session, of course, something has to go wrong in that process. But effectively, you just click a couple of buttons, and I can create new columns here. And then now, the next bit is I need to fill up that data. So I'm going to actually write out what that calculation is. So let's do that. I'm going to my control effort request. So inside SepaIQ, you can think of a stored request as your analysis. And I'm just going to make a really simple calculator here. So I'm going to drop in a script. Now, when people talk about MES and talk about contextualized data, a lot of the times people like to say it's no code. I think that everybody lies to you when they say you can do everything without code. I think code, unfortunately, sometimes is necessary. So here we go. We're going to call this control effort headroom. Now this is what's going to be put into that field. And I'm going to do 100, return 100 minus our results dot get control effort. So this is where I had that other value of what is our actual control effort. I'm going to say we have 1 decimal point, and I'm going to set my data type to a double. And I'm going to save. I'm going to save. And then what I'm going to do is I am simply going to republish that data. And what this is going to do, this is going to propagate that data back up and back down. So it'll go down to our Ignition environment, and it'll push that data back up into our data lake. So now if I'm, wrong database, if I'm back in my data lake, what I can do here is I can refresh, and now I see all of my data has been added to that new column that we had created. If I go to my Power BI report, what I can do, I can refresh. It pulls the new schema, and then I see my new control effort headroom. So that's effectively how quick and easy it is to manage your SepaIQ instance to push data both up and down. And now the next little bit. So I'm going to go back to our little drawing of the architecture. And what we've done is we've pulled in our data through MQTT. We've put in some signal conditioning. I've piped that data up into Ignition. I'm passing down insights into our Ignition environment. I'm passing up some of that data into our enterprise data lake, which is being consumed by Power BI. It doesn't have to be Power BI, it can be any reporting system out there. But the next little bit that I've got on here is our language model integration. So there's a lot of different ways that people like to interact with language models as it relates to production data. You see it all over the place, you see it all over at this conference. Sometimes you see the right way of doing things, and sometimes you see ways that I think are a bit of the wrong way. It's not the right way to push all of your data up to the language model and expect it to do the calculations for you. The right way to handle this is to register your tool or your system as a tool for these language models, and then use the language model for what it's really good at. The language model is really good at predicting the next word. It's good at understanding human language, understanding the intent of what you're saying, but it doesn't know your shop floor data. What we have to do is we instruct it. We say, come to us for that shop floor data. I will do the calculations for you, and I will return it straight back to you. So if I go back into my Ignition project here, I have a simple little chat. And I'm going to go ahead and I've got some pre-seeded questions. So in this case, I say, I suspect we had an oxygen transfer issue in this batch. Did we see any dissolved oxygen excursions? Did the airflow or the agitator max out at that time? So I'm going to go ahead and run this. It's going to take a little bit to run. What it's doing is it's going out over the network. It's going up, in this case, I think it's ChatGPT 5.1, I think is what I have it configured for. And it's going to retrieve the information out of SepaIQ, and it's going to funnel that response back to us, formatted in a way that's actually pretty useful. And then you can provide all sorts of instruction to this. This is all configurable within SepaIQ. You can always reach out to us to see what that looks like. You get pure ability to expose whatever data that it is that you want, and you can control how that data gets interpreted by SepaIQ before we retrieve the response. Now, one of the problems with language models that everybody's familiar with, especially over the past years, is how language models can kind of like hallucinate and make up information. And you're not going to run into that problem with the way that we have exposed ourselves. So by exposing our SepaIQ tool using tools and tooling, what that does is that permits us to very clearly define the data that gets returned. So if they ask for a batch that doesn't exist, it's not going to make up information. And unfortunately, that happens quite often. But in this case, it doesn't happen to us because of how we've registered it. So SepaIQ remains the source of truth, and the language model is the interface. You don't need to build an ad hoc, this is your ad hoc dashboard. You're not required to go out and run 5 or 6 different reports, try to combine the data, analyze it over your lunch break, and feed it back. You can simply just naturally talk to the language model. So in this case, what did we get? Well, it turns out, so bottom line up front, what we have here is we've got some pretty extensive problems. It gives us some pretty robust information. All of this information is pulled out of SepaIQ off of various analyses. The language model will hit SepaIQ, retrieve information, and it'll feed that back in. It'll take the output of one result, it'll feed it in as an input to another, and so it does some pretty complicated things, but again, the source of truth remains SepaIQ. So I've got a couple more that I can show you here, and then I'll show you an example of what we might get if we ask for data that doesn't exist. So, it's not just a chatbot that searches documents. It acts, SepaIQ, like the platform, acts as an agent on the back end, and it's backed by a real analytics engine. So the agent is restricted to using our tools for data retrieval. It cannot hallucinate. I'm trying to stress that. This is a common question that I get every single time that we show this. It does not hallucinate. So here we have some more information. These are completely separate questions off of various requests that I've built inside of SepaIQ. Now let's ask for some, give me some batch metadata around batch 1, 2, 3, 4, ABC, and let's just see what it comes up with. So what it should say here is effectively, I don't have any data for this batch. Are you sure that this batch exists? Or did you mistype it or something like that? And so hopefully we see that here. Yeah, so we might just have to wait here a second while that goes. And I guess while this is going, I can say, what this does is this really alleviates the problem of needing to become a power user. You don't need to be a power user in a reporting system. You don't need any of that. So here we go. Okay, so we have no batch. The closest context available is a sequence neighboring batches. So it's saying we don't have a batch, and it's starting to tell us about some of the other batches around it, but it's effectively told us, hey, this information doesn't exist here. So I think this is pretty cool. It saves, I'm the guy typically who's had to build out all of the reports, build out complicated dashboards, complicated ad hoc reporting systems. You can't get everything in one go. More often than not, the questions that you get asked involve 3, 4, 5, 6 different reports that you end up having to combine. So as the guy who's had to do that, I very much appreciate this. So let's recap what we've walked through real quickly here. Started with our raw noise. We showed our SCADA contextualizing layer, which turned it into something meaningful to a human. Then we showed SepaIQ. It takes that conditioned data, it performs some analytics on it. I showed you some very rudimentary analytics, but what I didn't show you is it is doing some of that excursion detection. It's writing all of those values both down and up across your organization. We've got a visualization layer inside of Power BI, common tools that everybody's really comfortable using. And then, we solve some of the hardest problems in manufacturing data, and a lot of people like to pretend that this doesn't exist, but manufacturing is a real world thing. Things happen after the fact. Post-facto updates are incredibly important to account for. If you're not accounting for post-facto updates, you cannot trust your data because data is dirty, production is dirty, an operator miskeys something and it runs through and you don't realize it for a month. It's very important to be able to fix that, and we show how easy it is to do that with SepaIQ. So ultimately, the gap in manufacturing today isn't the data collection, it is data meeting. Every single manufacturing site out there has historians full of real-time data, but very few have context to it. And in order to leverage AI and language models and all of these initiatives that are going on right now, you have to tackle the contextualization problem. And while you're doing it, it's really nice in the process to be able to manage those data updates. Remember, you exist in the real world. We do not exist in a perfect world. And sometimes, you got to manage those updates. So yeah, I'm going to jump back to my slide deck here and give you a quick breakdown of what this took. So SepaIQ itself, all we used was the platform. I'm not going to include the price of ignition. You could use whatever tool you wanted on your SCADA side. But with SepaIQ, it's for the specific layout of what we did, it's about $20,000 in an annual subscription plus support. You have the base platform, you have our advanced analytics module on top of SepaIQ, which unlocks a lot of the extra capability around the analysis that you perform. It allows you to do some of those ad hoc scripting analysis. And then we also have our language model integration, which is what exposes the tools to whichever language model provider that you want to use. And then if you want to learn more, you can come visit us, www.sepasoft.com. Check out our public demo, demo.sepasoft.com. You can request a demo, scan the QR code, visit any of these sites. Really appreciate it. Thank you guys so much.